Welcome back again to Last Week I Watched. I'm Mark and I watch and review movies and TV shows to help you decide whether or not they're worth your time or not. So this week I want to talk about Carrie Pilby, Choose or Die, War of the Worlds, the BBC adaptation, Escape Room 2, Tournament of Champions, Bingo Hell, and A Cure for Wellness. So let's talk about them. Okay, first up is Carrie Pilby. It's from 2016. It stars Belle Powley, Nathan Lane, William Moseley. It's showing on Netflix. So Carrie, played by Belle Powley, she's a person of high intelligence but struggles to make sense of the world as it relates to morality, relationships, sex, and leaving her apartment. She has great knowledge and intellect, but she's emotionally immature. And so her doctor, Dr. Petrov, played by Nathan Lane, he encourages her out to experience the world with a list of tasks for her to accomplish, such as get a job, make a friend, get a pet, go on a date, etc. As she works through the tasks, she grows emotionally and has to reevaluate her views on relationships and humanity. Now, this is not the kind of thing I'd usually select for myself, and it was in fact my lady that selected this, but I still found it interesting. I could identify with Carrie and how you feel different from other people, to have trouble relating and to isolate yourself away from other people. Personally, I'm finding COVID has just made it even worse. I literally go nowhere now. I have no desire to be out in the world with people, and the whole thing just causes me a lot of anxiety. So I can completely understand her struggle with Dr. Petrov's list of tasks to complete. It really takes an effort for her to do them, even when she couldn't see the value of them, and it can be especially difficult to put yourself out there when you've been hurt in the past. And I think she alludes at one point to a romance with her English professor when she was 16 that did not end well. But obviously it's a drama with romance elements, so she's likely to grow over the course of all this and perhaps make some friends and start a romance with somebody, which of course she does. So it's got a happy feel-good ending and romance, which ladies will no doubt enjoy. I'm not sure that the ending is necessarily that realistic. People and relationships are complicated, and I think it's pretty rare for it to all be perfect with a big bow on it. And it would only take something awful that would likely send her back into her apartment to hide again. But it's a nice romance, so let's be positive and go with a happy ending. Overall, I think the film is worth checking out. If you need a nice romance to enjoy with your special lady, then maybe check this out. But men, you may require something with explosions afterwards. Okay, next up is Choose or Die. It's from 2022. It stars Lola Evans, Isaac Butterfield, Eddie Marsan, and it's showing on Netflix. So after firing up a lost 80s survival horror game called Cursor, C-U-R-S, greater than R, a young coder, Kayla, played by Lola Evans, unleashes a hidden curse that tears reality apart, forcing her to make horrifying decisions and face deadly consequences. With the help of Isaac, played by Isaac Butterfield, they try to track down the creator of the game and find a way out of it. So I didn't know anything about this going in. I just saw it was on the new list. It looked interesting, and I have to say it gets into it pretty quickly with Hal, played by Eddie Marsan, and his family, and I like the way it circles back into them from the initial story. I thought, because it had Eddie Marsan in, and of course the other cast as well, it looked like it was a good cast, but Eddie's only sort of there at the beginning and then reappears towards the end of the film. The game is a bit like an evil version of Jumanji. It almost seems to manipulate your fears into the task that it presents. Although like an evil genie, it often presents you with a no-win choice. It's interesting that the game can interfere with reality, and later when they discover that Cursor has sort of embedded curse symbols in its code, kind of like they've written the game using the source code of reality, and that it can either provide death or positive benefits. I thought it was an interesting idea. There's some original ideas here, which is good. The film isn't overly long and it moves along at a reasonable pace. The game's levels push the kills in unusual ways. It sort of escalates towards a final level against the boss, which I thought was an interesting twist, and though the inversion of the effects was an interesting idea, in that yeah, I guess they flip the curse and how it works on its head. It was initially a little confusing, but I guess in the context of the boss level, they're allowed to change the rules. Clearly, they were setting this up though as some sort of franchise. I think I could easily see Cursor, the game, being misused online, or maybe becoming an app or something like that. I'm not quite sure though why there seems to have been such a backlash to the film. It's well made and acted, and I can't really fault the story, so I'm not sure what people were wanting from this and why it's so hated. I suspect it's probably one of those films that might be better appreciated in time, and obviously some of the snottier reviewers out there are probably going to have a problem against it just because it's horror, but that's how it goes. I can respect though that it tries to do original things and it has some fresh ideas. It's something different from the usual slasher tropes. Check it out and make up your own mind about it. Okay, next up is War of the Worlds. This is the BBC adaptation from 2019. It stars Rafe Spall, Eleanor Tomlinson and Robert Carlyle, and it was showing on Apple. So this is set in Edwardian England. Journalist George, played by Rafe Spall, he's living with Amy, played by Eleanor Tomlinson, in defiance of social conventions as he's married to another but unable to secure a divorce. Amy works as an assistant scientist Ogilvy, played by Robert Carlyle, and they must suddenly face the escalating terror of an invasion from Mars while fighting against an unstoppable enemy beyond humanity's comprehension. This is a BBC miniseries adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds book from 1898. After recently watching the Spielberg film adaptation of the book, I wanted to see a proper adaptation of the story that kept the Edwardian setting intact, as Spielberg's movie was a modern-day adaptation that focused largely on Tom Cruise's deadbeat dad character trying to get his children to safety against the backdrop of the Martian invasion. So I was quite excited for this BBC adaptation. If anything, they're known for doing lavish historical recreations, and so I was hoping it would be more faithful to the book and the period. And it is quite good. The period looks great, the Martians look great, although the effects work is very sparingly used, which is disappointing. I was hoping to see more of the armies of the period trying to fight off the Martian invaders, as per the book. The tripods look great, but I was confused by the sphere that crashed on the column. Now, it's supposed to be a cylinder that would sort of unscrew and open and release Martian war machines. Instead, we get a spinning ball that vaporizes and kills people it contacts with. It's quite a baffling change, and I can only conclude that they maybe just didn't have the budget for the CG effects, which is a shame. But I wouldn't have thought it would cost them that much more work to go from a ball to a cylinder, but what do I know, I guess. The costumes though and everything else looked great. The other problem though is much the same issue I had with the BBC's recent adaptation of Dracula. That also had a great cast, but like this, it took liberties with the story that didn't improve upon it. And I don't mind that we follow Amy more than George necessarily, and that they've kind of inverted the hero and the heroine in the story by having George go missing and Amy looking for him, and therefore she's experiencing the events. But they spend a lot of time on their relationship and the societal offence with them living in sin, and it just wasn't relevant to the story. If anything, the War of the Worlds is supposed to be a commentary on colonialism and aggressive expansionism of the empire at the time, and the effects that it had on other cultures and Aboriginal peoples and so on. So in this case, Britain is being crushed by a superior society instead of Britain expanding into the colonies and crushing the Aboriginal peoples. So the idea being that Britain would then experience what it's like and the results of what they're inflicting on other cultures around the globe at the time. It's distracting to get caught up in the social mores of the time, and it's not relevant to the point of the book. It also lessens the urgency and threat to the events as well. The story should have been steadily ramping up the pressure and the tension on the survivors as they are literally trying to survive extinction on a daily basis, obviously before the aliens succumb to our earthly microbes. And it just doesn't do that. It adds this distracting element. And another one thing it does also is it starts doing jump forwards in time in later episodes as well to a destroyed world living in the wreckage of the invasion. Again, it doesn't add any value except perhaps to show some consequences to the invasion. But it's kind of distracting because it gets ahead of itself, and they really could have just briefly touched on that at the end. It's not really relevant. So overall, I was happy for a period correct adaptation, but disappointed and slightly frustrated that they felt they had to mess around with a masterpiece. If you're going to adapt classic literature, just adapt it. Don't think you know better and try to mess around with it. It's the same with Dracula. Just adapt it for how it is. I know some reviewers beat on this for incorporating expectations from this time. And honestly, I'm not going to get into the whole thing about woke liberalism or any of that. I personally don't have a problem with it in the correct context. But honestly, the changes they made, they just weren't necessary. This is, as I said, this is not about their relationship. And whether or not they're married or not married. You know, we wasted time on George being ostracized at the office and not being given assignments anymore because he's shacked up with this harlot, and it's just not relevant to what's actually going on. So I don't understand why they made those changes at all, and I wish that they had just told the story and stuck to the lessons that are in the book. Teaching about why aggressively expanding into other culture space is ultimately destructive and damaging. And I think that would have been a far more powerful message than getting distracted on society being shits about who you can or can't love. I mean, this is not a gay issue or a trans issue or any of that sort of thing either. It was simply that he was already married. Again, nothing to do with an alien invasion. Still, there is enough good here for me to recommend checking it out. But if you love the book, you are likely to be disappointed and slightly frustrated by the changes. Okay, next up is Escape Room 2, Tournament of Champions. It's from 2021, starring Taylor Russell, Logan Miller, Deborah Ann Woll, and it's showing on Prime. So once again, 6 people unwittingly find themselves locked in another series of escape rooms. Joining forces with 2 of the original survivors, they soon discover they've all played the game before. This sequel continues on directly from the previous film, which is fine. Survivors from the previous Minos escape rooms, they're unwittingly brought together again to compete for survival in a whole batch of new escape rooms. The escape rooms are very clever again and complicated, and they seem to keep sort of similar scale to the rooms in the first film. So I think in the last one we had the large club that was upside down with the pool table on the ceiling, and that sort of fits in with quite a large bank styled escape room. And the previous one there had an outdoor one in the snow. This one's on a beach. So it sort of keeps the sort of overall scale on it. But the rooms are still sort of individual in their own puzzles and effects. But I do have a couple of issues with this film. Firstly, the film twists to try to reveal that someone thought dead from the last film is alive and is attempting to recruit Zoe, played by Taylor Russell, who has survived 2 of these films now, into becoming the new room designer. Now, I'm not sure why they think anyone who's been put through this hell would want to do this to anyone else. And they do rely on coercive control to try and force her to do it, but I still think you'd be looking for ways to mess with Minos the entire time you did the work. And, that might have been an intriguing sequel. She could have then been behind the curtain and sort of messed with the next set of games from behind the scenes and sort of ultimately bring Minos down. That would have been an interesting threequel, I guess, to finish out a trilogy. However, my second issue is the extended cut puts in 25 minutes of new footage but only really adds 6 minutes to the runtime. This is because it completely excises the twist about the survivor and Zoe's recruitment and replaces it with 2 new Minos employees, the room designer who wants Zoe's help to escape, and another person. So there are 2 versions of the film but with different endings and ultimately plot lines. Why? Isn't this just going to confuse people if they do another film to finish Escape Room out as a trilogy? And depending on which one you've seen now, it's not going to make sense. So I really don't understand what they were doing with this one. It confuses me. Which film is the definitive one with the correct story and the definitive ending? Overall, the film is more of the same, and while I really enjoyed the first film and I wasn't unhappy to see more escape room in this one, it doesn't really advance the plot along in any significant way, and if anything, it just creates some confusion now in the plot going forward, I guess. I think they spent a lot of time on the escape rooms perhaps and not so much time on the actual script, and if it returns for another outing, hopefully Escape Room will have some narrative point to advance and that it hasn't just trapped itself forever in a box of its own making. Check it out if you had a good time for the first one, but don't expect it to advance the story all that much. And please do be aware there are 2 versions of the film. They both have different endings. You might want to check them both out. Who can say which one is the definitive one at the moment? Who knows? Okay, next up is Bingo Hell. It's from 2021, starring Adriana Barraza, L. Scott Caldwell, and Richard Brake, and it was showing on Prime. So this is set in the barrio of Oak Springs, and there's a community of strong, stubborn, elderly friends living there, and the community is being gentrified, and they don't like it. They don't want any change. Their leader, Lupita, played by Adriana Barraza, she keeps them together as a community. They love their beloved community, and they just want it to stay how it is. But when their bingo hall is sold off to a malevolent force, they find themselves fighting against a force more powerful than money. So this is a fun little horror comedy set in a Latino community. It's trying to fend off gentrification, as the people that live there feel like it will be the death of their treasured community. But there are more sinister forces at work that are literally trying to kill and consume their community. So when Mr. Big, Richard Brake, arrives and takes over the community hall, he turns it into a much slicker Vegas-style bingo hall, and the locals are quickly seduced by promise of riches and things that play into their innermost heart's desires, but instead are ultimately rewarded with death. I'm assuming Mr. Big is some kind of demon or devil figure who's consuming their souls in exchange for some short-term gain, although it's never really explicitly explained what he is exactly. But it is surprisingly gory, and there are some quite graphic and gooey kills. Lupita and some others ultimately band together to fight off Mr. Big and save their community. And yeah, I had a good time with it. It was fun. It was a little bit different from the usual Stalker films. If you're looking for a quick horror comedy film, maybe check this out. I was pleasantly surprised by it. Okay, finally we have A Cure for Wellness. This one's from 2016. It stars Dane DeHaan, Jason Isaacs, and Mia Goth, and it was showing on Prime. So in this one we follow Lockhart, played by Dane DeHaan, and he's sent to a mysterious wellness retreat in the remote Swiss Alps to retrieve his company's missing CEO. He's needed for some kind of merger or something urgently, but they've lost all contact with him and they can't reach him. When he gets to the retreat, he soon starts to suspect the spa's treatments might not be what they seem. I'd wanted to see this one actually for a while, since the first trailer came out. It's got a great cast, and I thought it looked intriguing. It has some similarities to The Wicker Man, I think. The good original one, not the Cage remake where he's screaming at the bees. In that it's a fish out of water situation, and Lockhart is dropped into a situation for which he's completely oblivious and unprepared for. He's also sent into a remote setting where he's cut off from help and in sort of desperate trouble, really. The setting is really beautiful in the Alps, and the castle setting looks great, and as the film goes on, it sort of confronts you with a series of menacing treatments and sinister staff that will smile to your face while doing things that are actually more likely to make you sick. The film really takes its time to build the setting and sort of unpack the story. At 2.5 hours though, it's not a short film, although I can't say I was bored with it at any time. But could it have been cut tighter? Now, this is a really hard thing to say, I guess. I was starting to put things together, and taking the time to let you experience and understand it is probably necessary, especially as you witness the slow deterioration of Lockhart's mental and physical state. It really plays into some psychological elements as well, as keeps you guessing as to what's going on. When the film though finally reveals what ultimately is going on, it does shift into high gear towards the end. And I want to talk a little about the ending now, but I don't want to spoil it. So if you're interested in watching it, hit pause, go watch it now, and come back. Okay, did you watch it? Okay, so Volmar, he's the head doctor. He's been playing some sort of a long game. He's been using a fountain of youth medicine distilled from the patients, using the eels and the spa waters to extend his and his staff's life while he's waiting around for his daughter to come of age so he can impregnate her and resume his quest for a pure blood heir. Yes, it turns out that he's in fact the count or the baron or whatever that's mentioned sort of earlier in the story, that originally owned the castle, and that he'd been doing some messed up medical experiments on the townsfolk, and they ultimately set fire to him and excised his baby and everything, and it's pretty terrible. But yeah, turns out he's now creeping around, sucking the life out of people and using it to extend his own. The whole thing's pretty messed up, but I felt it was worth the time investment to get to. Overall, I think it's a pretty good movie. It's got a great cast, great locations, and it looks fantastic. It's beautifully shot and quite menacing at points, but it is very long, and that seems to be the overall complaint about the film from most other people. I think possibly it could have been tightened up into something pretty special, but it's a really hard call to make. I do appreciate that it slows down a bit to let it establish characters and settings and then slowly unwraps itself. And it gives you time to really sort of wonder what's going on and build some tension and suspicions and distrust and everything else that you need to do. So, you know, something like this, which has a lot of things going on, and it needs to be sort of long enough to, you know, not to go and this happened and this happened and this happened and I'm done. It needs to really let itself sort of work its way in there. So I think it's quite a difficult call to make. I don't know if it would ruin the movie though to mess with the pacing of it. I think in some ways it's very much an old school classic horror movie. It really takes its time, and that's okay. I was alright with that. So I recommend checking it out. I think if you like a sort of a classic horror movie that's a bit more leisurely paced, that takes time to really sort of work its way in there, then definitely check it out and make up your own mind about it. Okay, so those are my reviews for this week. I hope, as always, that they are of some interest to you. If you want to leave any comments below, please feel free. If you've got any suggestions, leave them below also. Happy to discuss. As always, please do click on the like and subscribe so I can notify you when the next video comes out. And on screen is my Twitter link if you want to follow me. I tweet about what I'm watching, so if you want to come on there and talk about anything or tweet at me, feel free. As always, I hope you all stay well, enjoy some movies and TV, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.